Welcome to the Legends Behind the Craft podcast, where we feature top leaders in the wine and craft beverage industry with your host, Drew Hendricks. Now, let's get started with the show.
Drew Thomas Hendricks here. I'm the host of the Legends Behind the Craft podcast, where I talk with leaders in the wine and craft beverage industry. Past guests of Legends Behind the Craft include Daniel Dow of Dow Vineyards, Joe Wagner of Copper Cane Wine and Provisions, Guillaume Fabre of Clos Celine. If you haven't listened to any of these yet, be sure to check them out and subscribe. Today's episode is sponsored by Barrels Ahead. Barrels Ahead, we work with you to implement a one-of-a-kind marketing strategy, one that highlights your authenticity, tells your story, and connects you with your ideal customers. In short, we help wineries and craft beverage producers unlock their story to unleash their revenue. Go to barrelsahead.com today to learn more. I am super excited to talk today with Tyler and Michelle Bredeson of Bold North Cellars. Bold North Cellars is a winery, brewery, wood-fire pizza oven, and event center located in Alexandria, Minnesota. Tyler's the logistics and operations guru, while Michelle focuses on customer-facing aspects of the business. Together, they've created this must-see destination in the heart of the Minnesota Lakes country. Welcome to the show, Tyler and Michelle.
Hi.
Hi.
Thanks for having us.
Well, thank you so much for being on. So I got to go right off the bat. Alexandria, Minnesota. Tell us about the wine landscape there.
Well, Carlos Creek Winery was our original brand under Bold North Cellars, and this winery began in 1999. So it was one of the first 5 in the state.
Yes.
I believe.
Yeah.
But now I think in the Alexandria Lakes area, we have probably about 7 different wineries now. So it's definitely, the Minnesota wine industry has been growing rapidly over the last 5 years, I'd say. About 5 years ago, there were about 70 some wineries. Now we're over 100. So
that's amazing. And you were one of the first 5. And so the Alexandria got the first AVA in Minnesota, I think back in 2005. Mm-hmm. What before we get into that, what brought you guys into the wine industry?
So my parents actually started the journey to Carlos Creek. They were looking for a business at that time to essentially retire into. They had both done different things in their career and were looking for kind of a new venture. I was graduating from college at the time. Michelle was a year younger than I. And I had been helping them a little bit with some research on not only this winery, but they then looked at some other case studies in other states to look at what kind of experience fit what they thought they could be most successful at. And so in looking through that, I got interested in it. And I had a very, very different plan at the time in terms of what I was going to do after I graduated. But
what were you going to do?
I was actually headed to law school.
Really?
So I was headed to law school. And so I stayed that for a year to say, all right, is this something that I think I could make a life out of too, would be interested in. So I worked here for a year, really, really started to love it. And then Michelle came down the next year after she graduated.
Oh. And Michelle, what were your plans before the wine industry?
I didn't really have a whole lot planned. I went to school for marketing. So it really was a natural segue because at the time when I was graduating, it was perfect time for them because they were looking at starting event business here. So they hadn't done events previous to that. And the previous ownership had a bunch of horses actually that they raised out here. So there was like a 9,000 square foot horse barn that then Tyler's family converted into the event center. And so they were looking for somebody to start the wedding and event business out here. So they asked if I would be interested. And I was like, sure. Yeah, weddings. That sounds great. So I was 22 and started doing weddings. So it was great.
Well, that's amazing. Yeah, there's a lot of wedding event business down here where we're located in the Temecula area. It's a great meld between the wine, the events, and the beers. So tell me about, but going back to the wine, tell me about your parents started the were there vines on the land before they bought the property?
There were, yeah. The winery before had been operated in a very, very different way than it has come to be now. It was much more of a cottage kind of a project for the previous owners who started it. And so there were vines here. There weren't a lot. And the extent to which local vines, local wines, and grapes were used in the production and as part of the fabric of the winery was not as much as it is at this point. And so we kind of came in and knew that was something that we thought was really important, was to emphasize Minnesota production, to make that more part of what we're doing as our production. Not that we weren't going to completely move away from things that were out of state, but just we wanted to make sure that Minnesota product held its own place. And so there was work to be done. There was a lot more vines that need to be planted, some that need to be kind of refurbished from the condition that they were in. So that took a number of years for us to figure out what worked, what didn't, different varieties, some that had been developed by some private growers, some developed by the University of Minnesota, et cetera, that we were then experimenting with and still experimenting with.
Yeah, it was actually kind of a cool time, I think, to be coming into the industry because it was, more wineries had been popping up over the years, but it was a big boom in grape cultivation. So there were a lot more grape growers coming out that, obviously the University of Minnesota has developed some of these grape varieties, but then also, like Tyler was saying, independent grape breeders were really starting to release some really cool, unique varieties that previously most of the varieties that we could grow here were so high in acid that you would have to really balance that acid out with sweetness. So, not letting the fermentation go all the way to dry. But with some of the new varieties, they hold on to their sugars a lot better, and we're a little bit lower in acid. So you're able to create some more dry wines with the varieties that were being developed. So that was kind of a cool.
What are some of those varieties?
Well, one of the big ones that it has still had its challenges, especially as far north as we are, but certainly is an important grape variety in Iowa, large sections of Minnesota. There's ones people growing out on the East Coast is Marquette. Marquette was a huge one for the development of the grape industry in non-traditional areas, but also just for the grape program for University of Minnesota. And as Michelle was alluding to, a lot of these varieties, Frontenac was another one that came earlier on and maybe didn't see as much popularity, but we think it has a very, very strong presence when done in the right kind of a wine. But as those were coming in, and as we purchased the winery in 2008, there was a lot of other wineries and vineyards that transitioned from that kind of a hobby into an actual full-fledged business in a real industry. And so it was a fun time to be a part of that. There still are a lot of small wineries that are more run as, it's a couple that are doing it on the side, that kind of a thing. But there's now a dozen or more that you would call a really full-fledged, realized businesses that are making a big go of it.
Yeah. What were some of the challenges? Oh, sorry.
I was going to say a couple other cool varieties too that I just want to point out. Some that I really like. Petit Ami. It's a white variety that was developed in Minnesota, but it's kind of this really nice Sauvignon Blanc style wine.
Yeah.
So it has a lot of citrus notes to it, some minerality. It has a little floral. It's a really kind of cool grape that, when harvested slightly early, it gives you a lot more of that Sauvignon Blanc taste. And it's been the cool thing too about the industry here is that it's not settled yet. So we're still experimenting a lot with how to utilize some of these varieties. So, some years when we get the vintage in, we've gotten it maybe ripe, and we find that maybe that's not the best expression of that grape. So maybe we need to harvest that early next year. And there's still there's not any set, like, this is the way you should do it with this grape. So we don't have some of that rich heritage or like that set recipe. So we didn't do a lot more experimenting and, experimenting with barrels and what flavors from the barrels are going to bring out the best flavors in the wine. So it's still kind of cool to be able to mess with that stuff a little bit.
It's still like with the whole Minnesota, I mean, you get to Napa and it's kind of found its footing. You kind of know what a Napa Valley Cabernet tastes like. Right. It's exciting to be in regions like outside of the Napa Sonoma area. When Minnesota, tell me a little bit more about like the Frontenac and Marquette. Like what do you envision the Minnesota style evolving into or kind of settling into?
It's a loaded question a little bit. A lot of people are going to give you very different answers on it. I think, taking nothing away from the red varieties and the dry red varieties that are produced here, I think one of the things that Minnesota does best is actually a dry or a semi-dry white wine. There also are some really cool blushes too, but the Petit Ami that Michelle just mentioned, I mean, everybody has their different favorites and whatnot, right? So this doesn't mean that this is the be all end all, but that is, when produced correctly, I think one of the strongest wines that Minnesota can produce. I don't mean necessarily ours. I just mean that grape can grow well here and do a very good job of standing on its own in that style. Michelle mentioned Sauvignon Blanc, but people that want that crisp, slightly acidic, really kind of clean drinking white wine, it's a great choice.
And there was a new grape, Itasca, was just released. Was it 3 years ago?
Yeah, that's when people really started making big plantings of it.
Yeah, so we actually have our first vintage of that coming out this year, and that also is coming out really nice. So I think that'll be another new variety that will be fun to work with in the future. Just going on that experimental thing still, but we were approached by a private grape developer to plant some of his grapes, one of them being Crimson Pearl, which is a red variety. And when we first got it, we started making it as a dry red. But then one time we decided to experiment. Let's try a rosé out of it. And we made a very small batch, but when that came out, it was amazing. And so now all of our Crimson Rosé, we've been propagating throughout the years. We have how many acres of that one now?
I think we're approaching 5 of that.
Yeah. So, and we use all of that for our Crimson Rosé now, because it expresses so well as a rosé versus a dry red, or at least we think it's a little bit better that way.
Michelle alluded to some of the acidity challenges that the grapes in Minnesota, but everywhere across the northern tier of the U.S. has some similar challenges to that. So I think that the wines that balance well with a little bit of an elevated acidity level are always good choices. Not that you can't do some great dry red wines, but there always is a little bit more work to getting those to be, in a way that people are used to drinking dry red wines. And that's part of the problem in itself. That phrase is that you look at how established wines are, and whether you're talking about California or areas over in Europe or whatever, the acidity level of some of the dry red varieties here is very different. And it makes a different wine. And some people really, really like it. Some people maybe aren't as into it. And part of that is preference, and some of that is just inexperience with it too. So there's a lot of challenges there.
Yeah, and I guess for listeners too, something that might help them relate a little bit is that the acidity in our wines is very similar to what you would find in like German wines or Northern French wines. It's going to be very similar to that kind of style of wine.
As you're describing it, I was kind of thinking of some of these like steely Austrian wines.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Exactly.
Like a Gruner Veltliner or something.
Yep.
Now, that kind of brings up with that northern climate. Are you having to put it on some special rootstocks for the soil, or?
No, we actually, it really doesn't work for us to do anything with rootstock because we're cold enough and we have deep enough frost here that everything has to be an actual hybrid variety. So grafting anything like that, it really doesn't work because it would be great, but the top dies back every year. Even if your rootstock is remaining viable, the top itself dies.
Okay.
So you have to do actual hybrids. And so that's where things like Frontenac, like Marquette, some of the others Michelle's have mentioned too, is that they're crossbred. So everything is that new variety where we don't have anything that's tied to another.
Oh, okay. So you're not okay. That actually answers the question I had last night. I had a friend in town. We went to high school together. He lives in Minneapolis.
Sure.
I was talking to him about the wines. He's very into the beer industry there. But we were talking about the deep freezes and how the vines have to be a little bit different. But he couldn't answer the question, so I'm glad you guys did.
Yeah. So that's where you see completely different names than what you're used to in other areas. People have tried things like growing even some of the hardier of your traditional European varieties, and at least where we are, they're not successful. I know some people in extreme southern Minnesota, Iowa, on a few different varieties have had some luck, but it's very spotty.
Yeah. And those that have planted those even farther south, what they do is they actually bury the vines. So you have to take everything down and bury them in order for them to survive. So, because if you let the top die off, then you have to grow for another 3 years before you're going to get that harvest. And so if it's happening every year, then obviously you're not getting any harvest ever.
Sure. And you have what? You have 160 acres. How many under vine?
It's about 25.
25? Yeah, that's great. And then the other thing I was looking through your inventory. You also do some hybrid fruit wines. What do you use? Like the blueberry one looked particularly interesting to me. We have a local producer here that does a dry blueberry wine.
So our fruit wines are a little bit different. It's a white wine base, and then we add fruit back to it.
Okay.
So we don't ferment the blueberry or the peach, so we add that in after fermentation. So it's a little bit of a different process, but gives you a really deep fruit flavor when you do it that way.
I can imagine that. The dry blueberry wine I had, Hungry Hawk Winery here. They actually fermented it just the blueberries just like grapes, and it turned it almost like a very Pinot Noir like.
Oh, yeah.
I ended up cellaring it for a few years, and it was very surprising.
Yeah, blueberry. It's really cool that they're having success with it. Blueberry is a tough fruit to maintain blueberry flavor through a fermentation of, because a lot of the flavor is tied up in the skin of the fruit. You don't have. I mean, you've eaten blueberries. You kind of know when you bite into it, that's where you're getting it. The flesh is more mild, at least, or significantly more than that skin is, and so under fermentation, depending on your methods, it's tricky.
Yeah, I can imagine on that. He only did it once, so that probably says something about it. And every time we go back, I ask him when the next one's coming. He's like, nope.
Yeah, probably was one of those like little pet projects where he wanted to try it out, and probably took a lot of effort, but came out amazing. So
yeah,
they get those sometimes.
So with the wines, you also run a brewery out of the same location, or?
Yeah, same property. Yeah.
Yep, same property, different building. But that was started in the late spring of 2019.
And what brought the desire to have a brewery on there? Just make it just a cohesive event, kind of one-stop shop?
Essentially, yeah. I mean, it's an idea that we had kicked around for a while. There was a period of expansion that we went through in the winery where we grew fairly rapidly from about 2012 through 2017 or so. And so during that period, it just didn't feel right. We had looked at it, and every year kind of talked about, is this the right year? Is this the year we kind of want to start that program? And when we were changing and growing so much, it just didn't feel like we would do it justice. So late 17, we started talking about it. We planned a lot through 18 and then started construction late 18, finished up in early 2019. And yeah, you hit the nail on the head. I mean, it's really to not only expand what we were able to do and experience as a craft beverage product, but also to expand that from a customer standpoint, where now people come in. Not everybody likes wine, not everybody likes beer, but now, generally speaking, everybody can find something that they like and can connect with.
Yeah, and it kind of, our big thing here is we want to be a place where people feel like they can come and celebrate, whatever life's events they're celebrating. So whether it's like a new job or, coworkers going out for a night, or, you just had a new baby and it's your first time adventuring from the house. Like, we want to be that place everyone feels comfortable coming to. It's fun. There's beer, there's wine, there's pizza. We have live music every Friday, Saturday, year round. And so we really like to make it like this celebratory place that is also, educational in some regards, and then also local. And we really try and push that, farm to glass sort of thing in the wine side of things. But yeah.
I love that idea. I mean, I wish more wineries out west would be doing more of this kind of holistic type of experience. There's still a little bit of aristocracy in a lot of our wineries. They got to get more fun if they're going to attract the newer consumer. And I think the breweries, we've seen it a little bit more where go to visit the brewery and someone in the party just doesn't like beer, so they offer the wine, but you very rarely see it the other way around.
Yeah, and we've always, since being here, Tyler's parents were really big into this too, but we wanted it to be a friendly, inviting wine experience. So obviously, if somebody came in with a lot of wine knowledge and wanted to learn all of the things about Minnesota grape growing, we could definitely share that with them and nerd out on wine. But we also wanted it to be that place where somebody's coming in, they're like, I have never had wine in my life. I don't know what I'm talking about. I feel nervous and anxious. And I know that these wine people are going to think that I'm less than because I don't know anything about wine. So we wanted to be comfortable for those people too, so that they feel like they are welcome to come in and have whatever wine experience they want.
Yeah, it's really big for us to meet people at their level, whatever that level is. Like Michelle said, if you've never had a glass of Cabernet before and you want to try ours, we're not going to browbeat you about what your experience has been before or expectations or any of that.
Makes it so much more accessible. On the brewery side, are you doing any, maybe you do, and I didn't look at it, but are you doing any kind of collaborations between the winery and the brewery with like aging your beers or adding some wine to the?
Yeah, we do a lot of that actually. We can't technically add wine to beer. You can add different grape products and things like that. You can do different barrels. Adding straight wine to it ends up getting it into like a non-formulary, goofy product that has to be licensed differently. But a crossover, right away the first summer we did a fun sour beer that we put in. I think we added like 100 gallons of Frontenac right to that.
Oh, yes.
It was a Frontenac that had been blushed. So we added this great, really flavorful, Frontenac makes a very intense pink blush juice. And that was really, really neat. We have since done a lot with trading barrels back and forth and working with, for instance, we just had a Flanders Red that came out, and that was aged in wine barrels that I think that had mostly Marquette in it.
Yeah.
So that adds a great wine characteristic to it. It was in those wine barrels for more than a year.
1 to 2 years. Some of them were 2 years.
Yeah, right. And so that brings a really, really interesting element to a wine that's already kind of funky. Flanders Reds already have a lot of that different characteristic from being co-fermented with different kinds of inoculations, and then adding wine characteristic on top of that. Yeah. Gave it a real depth. That was cool.
And then we did a Baltic porter in our port barrels as well.
Oh, nice.
So, yeah. And actually, so that gave it a lot of that port note to it, and kind of made that a little bit, and just increases just the funk, I guess, of some of those wines, like the barrel aged wines. It's kind of,
and also helps with all that crossover appreciation, because someone may find that sour as their entry point to wine, and vice versa. The wine person an entry point into beer.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And I think especially the second example that you gave there, the sours being your entry point for your typical wine drinker, is abundantly true. We see that every day here, and it's fun. It's fun to get people. We have families that have kind of experienced us only on one side, and they either have the one of the two spouses didn't like one or the other, and now they feel like it's a more complete experience. We've had a lot of people who have been only wine fans. We know longstanding customers that are now really into beer.
Yeah, it's because we used to, back when it was just the winery, we would get a lot of ladies groups coming out. And then when we added the brewery, we see that we get the ladies plus the guys. So everyone's coming together, which is, It's a really cool thing. You'll see these groups walk up, and, some will split to the brewery, some will split to the winery, and then they'll meet up outside and make a little picnic for themselves and just enjoy the day together.
And people can bring food to the winery and have a picnic?
we have like a deli, like cheese.
Yeah, I was going to talk to you about your Stomp and Sizzle, the food that ties it all in.
Yeah. And then we've got the wood fire pizza kitchen, which started at the same time we started the brewery. So it's in the same building as the brewery.
Okay.
So that's Stoke. And our philosophy there is really just as fresh ingredients as we can get. We home make all of our dough. So it's, just 5 ingredients in our dough. We make it every day and roll it every day fresh. And then all of our produce that we use is primarily fresh produce that we're getting in. And then Sizzle, I don't know if you want to talk about Sizzle.
Yeah, Sizzle's been kind of a little bit of a funny project given the last couple years that everybody has gone through. So one of the things that we wanted to do with Sizzle was give a different experience and also take a little pressure off of our pizza kitchen, which was getting really, really busy. But yeah, Sizzle is basically the classic food truck experience, trying to get some things that are that really tasty, occasionally unhealthy type kind of food. But this year we're doing a little bit of a different vision for Sizzle. We're going to be really, really digging into some very artisanal burgers. Is going to be kind of the theme for this year.
Yeah. And it gives us a fun, creative, what is it called?
It's right.
Food.
It's your outlet for us to kind of geek out on food and do some fun things. The pizza is a little bit more this kind of stable, very, very user-friendly, egalitarian type kind of a thing. And Sizzle can be that kind of pop here and there where we're playing around.
Mm-hmm. That sounds fantastic. On the you talked about the pandemic, and everybody's kind of coming into it, going around it, and coming out of it.
Oh, yeah.
How has the pandemic changed your winery and your operations? Well, first off, we just had to kind of, as everybody did, just adapt to find out, okay, what is the way that we're going to get through this? Mm-hmm. One of the things that we were extremely fortunate with is, Michelle's alluded to it a couple of times, we have a large outdoor space that people can experience us with. That outdoor space worked to our advantage heavily because, for some obvious reasons, right? I mean, people were worried about being closer together, inside tight spaces, all that kind of a thing. And being able to come in, we changed how we were serving so that people were very comfortable inside, but then you'd be able to get outside. I know people could choose to take their mask off if they wanted to at that point and really feel a little bit more of a sense of normalcy. And with enough acreage where people can kind of spread out and be as close or as far away from other people as they wanted to, which is great. One of the things go ahead. If you want to talk about it. I was
going to say, so in that we kind of then were able to, we spent more money than on our outdoor areas to make them better. And so that was definitely something that we wanted to improve during COVID, which is now still, a great benefit to us, having some even better outdoor space for people.
One of the things that we changed from a real fundamental level of how we do our tastings, and this is a little difficult to see without seeing our bar space, but most people will have gone to a winery and you do a tasting, and typically that's at the bar. You're in front of the server there, and you're a lot of times getting a sample of wine. You finish that one, another one is poured, et cetera, et cetera. That's a fairly common way of going about that. We had to figure out a way where we had to get those people still able to do tastings, but get them outside where they were comfortable. Because our bar in the summertime, we're very touristy, was jammed. We're 3-4 people deep, and it just didn't work. COVID it was not going to happen. So we devised a system of taking all of your samples in a way where you could kind of take them to go and go anywhere on the property. And so we created these little boards. We made these things where you did samples more like a brewery. Yeah. Is. And then you could take that and you could go anywhere with it. And that has changed how we're going to do tastings permanently, because we find that even as now some people are returning to some level of comfort with being inside, they love the fact that they can go and experience our wines in whatever way they want. We have multiple different patio areas, some with music, some without, and people can kind of pick their experience.
It was definitely one of those shared knowledge things. So because we had a brewery and we were already doing that with brewery, it made it a lot easier for us to adapt that for the wine side of things. And it just seemed like a natural way of doing that. And we got really positive feedback on that. People loved it that way. So
that's some great advice. I have seen those multiple. Taking it away makes so much sense, because usually you get just this little taste, you walk away, and then you got to figure out this next one. Makes so much sense. So I'm always trying to figure out all the silver linings that came out of this, and the stuff that's just going to stick. We know QR codes were one. Everyone they figured out how to use a QR code.
So I know.
That's one of the other ones that I hear quite often. And also making more of a custom experience. You mentioned like you have the touristy bar where it's 3 deep, but I talked to a lot of other wineries and they've kind of tailored back that and kind of emphasized more like the food wine pairing or more of like a sit down experience. Have you guys looked at any of that type of stuff?
We do some more of those things in some of our off season, realistically based upon our space and the type of pressure that we get in our tourist season. A lot of those really custom experiences are tough in the summertime. Sure. We are looking at trying to add some more ability for people to create their own experiences. I know Michelle was looking at a project the other day about trying to be better caterers of the large volume of bachelor groups that we get.
Oh, okay.
In the summertime, we love them, but it's always a challenge to figure out how do you adapt a space that's a little bit more defined for families, groups of 2, 4, 6, or whatever, to 15 to 18 women coming in and wanting to be together. And so how do we do that in a way where they can sit down, a little bit like you said, have maybe some sort of a wine themed appetizer, et cetera, get your tastings or just an assortment of bottles for the group to share and have a very private experience without having to make this massive booking that's planned 4 months out, et cetera, et cetera.
In the bachelorettes tie into your wedding and event space.
Yes,
that's right.
Talk to me about that as you're coming out. You must have a backlog. I mean, there are so many weddings waiting to happen.
Yeah. It was, I think we're starting to see in 2023, it's lightened up a little bit. 2022 booked. I mean, it was booked by, I think, June or July of the previous year, 2021. So this season we have most weddings we've ever booked and definitely full. For next year, bookings are coming in still higher than normal, but not quite as much as we were seeing in the 2022 season. But yeah, it's it was kind of a strange. The event side, I think, probably got hit the hardest.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah,
especially
in our business.
Yeah, because it just there were so many more restrictions and the restrictions were detrimental to a lot of what people envisioned for their days. And so I think a lot of people decided to change their visions and adapt in other ways where they weren't going to a typical venue that would be an indoor venue.
The great part about the events, though, is that it now returning to a bit more normalcy in that program, it is such a unique way for us to connect with customers on a way that is unlike how you would with any typical customer. Whether they are, we're specifically talking about the couple themselves, or it's, family or really good friends or whatever, they get to experience our wine and our beer in our facility in a really, really memorable way. And they become such big fans of ours and almost kind of like cheerleaders for us out there in the community because they had such a formative event happen and chose to happen with us, which is a great honor.
Yeah. And the cool thing too, that I always think of for venues like ours that are, we're a business first and foremost that decided to have events here. But it's when you get married here, you can come back then on your anniversary and
I was thinking
you
about
can still get the same wine maybe that you had that's really special to you. And then you can bring your family back or when you have kids and it just becomes this really important part of their life that they can still continue to enjoy. Because if you just go to a regular venue that doesn't have a regular business, you can't go back and visit. That's not really a thing to do. So
that's a great point. I was also thinking it's probably goes a long way to help expand your presence outside of Minnesota because people come from a wedding from all across the United States.
Oh, absolutely.
They may never wind up in Alexandria otherwise.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Alexandria is, there's a lot of people who have either lived here for a time or lived in Minnesota, perhaps lived somewhere else, and then they come back this way. And so we have lots of weddings that maybe the couple has an uncle or an aunt or a grandparent or whatever that lives in this area, and it's something that they had experienced perhaps as a child doing vacations here, and so they come back in. And exactly to your point, then now they're dragging in new friends and family that they created in New York or California or wherever.
Yeah, it's definitely a gathering area for Minnesota. The Lakes Country is that retreat area. So we're kind of right in the center of Minnesota. So we're in this hub of vacation land for those that live in Minneapolis, even those that live in Fargo. It's a quick drive down the main road that divides Minnesota from North Dakota to Wisconsin. And so it's a really easy way to get away from the big city and come to the lakes area that's just, has a lot to offer besides even just us. So
Sure. And I was talking about offering and events. You got to talk to me about this Grape Stomp festival.
Grape Stomp is a pretty wild week. Yeah.
Oh, wow,
yeah. Well, Grape Stomp
back in action this year, or was it out of action?
Yeah, it is. And I mean, the great thing about Grape Stomp is that it is predominantly outside. And so even last year, we were able to do it with fairly minimal interference in terms of the normal operation. The 2 years ago, it was done, but it was done in a massively reduced kind of a way. But yeah, back totally to normal this year, more or less. It involves a lot of our work. We start working on it in
January.
Yeah. Oh, wow. But we get about 15,000 people over the weekend. We have somewhere around 350 different vendors, and some of those are food. A lot of those are different people that make a variety of different artistic products and goods to sell and all manner of different things. And we always have 3 or 4 bands going on at any given time. Usually some other kind of large promoter. This year we're having it's a big log lumberjack
show.
Thank you. Show. Yeah.
Oh, that would be awesome.
It's cool. Yeah. It's fun to watch.
Yeah.
And then obviously the grape stomping too. So that's, the festival centers around the grape stomping, which to my knowledge, is one of the larger business grape stompings in the nation, actually. So we have around 650 to 700 people that will compete over the weekend. Yeah.
And we'll stomp
in grape stomping. Like, so you tell me about that.
Yeah. So you've seen probably everyone has seen that video, and most people will know what I'm talking about. There is an unfortunate incident with a lady who was a newscaster, I believe, out on the East Coast. It's a simple search on YouTube would get you this, and she falls kind of tragically and loses her breath. It's a sad but kind of funny video, but that is the experience. We have barrels that are cut in half. A certain amount of grapes is dumped into them. You have one person who is stomping those grapes. There is a hole drilled in the bucket. The idea is then to get grapes into juice and get juice to pour through that hole. There is another person who is standing on the ground in front of these barrels that are all elevated. And they're there to kind of use their hands to help gather the grapes together to make the stomping very efficient. And so, it's a teamwork thing. We'll stomp about 11,000 pounds of grape every year.
Oh, man. And you use the juice?
We do not.
We do not use the juice.
We do not. Yeah, that's always the question. In theory, you could. But
I kind of had to ask.
It would make wine. It would just make very bad wine.
The difficulty is because this is all done outside. So the difficulty would be in spontaneous fermentation starting.
Oh yeah. It sounds like a great time. So what does the winner get?
So we have multiple different winners. So it was divided into different days, but the ultimate winner at the end, if you kind of go through a couple of rounds of playoffs, gets a case of wine, right?
Rounds of playoffs. Oh my god.
Yeah.
Does it get increasingly? I mean, do you alter? Is it the same amount? I know nothing about this. As you get up into the upper echelons to the semifinals and finals, does the vat, is it different, or is it always the same amount of grapes?
Oh, it's always the same amount. It's just the competition ramps up significantly.
Yeah. So every heat has 8 teams that compete.
So
let's take Saturday. So Saturday, every 15 minutes, 8 teams of 2 compete. And so the winner of each heat gets automatically put into the semifinals. And then sometimes the winner from, usually we have then like 2 to 4 stomp off rounds. And then the top 4 teams from there will go to the final stomp. And then the team that wins the final stomp wins the case of wine.
It gets intense. We've had people who have won multiple years.
Yeah.
And
what would an average, like what would like a winning stomp? How much juice would?
So the juice is measured. So on the bucket below, they have to hit a certain line. So it's whoever can do it the quickest.
Okay, so it's not the volume; it's the speed in which you fill it.
The speed on some of the winning times is pretty remarkable. I've seen people do it in 20 seconds. 20. It's about, I would say, it's about a gallon of juice.
Oh, wow.
And it happens really quick.
Yeah. I mean, some rounds go 3 minutes.
Right.
And some rounds go 30 seconds.
Yeah. You can tell when you have somebody who has been down that road before.
Probably a lot has to do with the growing conditions. Like you'll have plumper fruit some years than others. So it's going to fill into the line quicker. Do you have like a world record leaderboard for your Stomp? Like,
we don't.
I don't think we do. No.
That would be. We should.
It's a good idea.
I think we might start that.
2019. So and so in 30 seconds. It hasn't been beat in 3 years.
Right. That is a good idea.
Yeah, that sounds fantastic. I love that stuff. So, gosh, as we're coming down towards the end of this, is there anything I haven't talked to you guys about or asked you that you'd like to talk about?
Gosh, I don't know.
We were talking in the pre-show about somebody. I always like to ask who you admire most in the industry right now.
Yeah. One of them is a winery that's relatively close to us. Our winemaker is close to their winemaker too. They have a cool kind of family story as to how they grew into where they are now. But Wollersheim Winery over in Wisconsin, they're about, don't quote me on this, I think a half hour outside of Madison or so. Mm-hmm. And they've just done a really cool job embracing locally grown grapes and becoming really pretty common across Wisconsin. They're sold all over the place and have won lots of awards. I think it's a Prairie Fumé that they do, that they took it to blend of, I think, a variety of different northern tier climate grapes. And but they've gone on now they have a distillery, and just it's a gorgeous place, a really, really cool spot to come out. Short drive from a population center, so they get a lot of bus groups and whatnot from the Madison area. But yeah, they're fun, and they're still operating it as a family. Mm-hmm. Cool spot.
When you're not drinking Minnesota and Wisconsin wine, what do you guys like to drink?
Ooh, we dabble all over, really.
I'm partial to Bordeaux reds. I'm a big fan. So, but yeah, I mean, all over the place too. What were we were trying to find a Carmenere the other day. That's a big fan of ours, we're a big fan of it, but they're hard to find.
Yeah. We like to, when there are interesting varieties out, those are the ones I usually like to go to. So if I go to a liquor store and there's a variety that I haven't heard of before, I'm like, oh, I need to try that one. What is that? And whenever I go on vacation somewhere, I'm always looking to see, do they have local wine on their restaurant menus, or can I find a local wine in their liquor stores? Being from a developing wine area, it's really interesting to me to learn about other wine regions. Every state has wineries pretty much. So, it's usually they're hard to find, which is unfortunate because, you hope that every state is embracing their own wine industry, but it's definitely, I went to Georgia recently and could not find a Georgia wine to save my life. But I know they have a bunch of wineries. So I was like, I really wanted to try some, but.
Yeah, I do. When you're traveling, you do like to find the local juice. We just spent a lot of time in Arizona, and I've become a big fan of a lot of the Arizona wines.
Yeah, they've got great wine down there.
They do, yeah.
We've had a lot of their stuff. It's good. Especially like the Sedona area up there. They've got a lot of wineries that make some great wines.
Yeah, and the Spring Valley area, or Spring Creek, right? Just Cottonwood, and they got Caduceus and Merkin Cellars from James Maynard Keenan. I'm trying to get him on the show.
Oh yeah,
I mean,
doing on Wilcox area. But anyways, back to where can people find more about you and all the events that you have in this Grape Stomp, which sounds fantastic?
Yeah, I mean, our website is probably the best source. There's links on there to everything that we do. You could go to Carlos Creek Winery. You can go to Northmen Brewing Company, and it will just lead you into either spot, whatever you want to do. The Grape Stomp information is on there as well. I mean, the best way is to come and see us. I mean, it's a fun spot to take a vacation to. I mean, even if you're out of state, there's a lot to do in this area of Minnesota. And
if you've never been to Minnesota before, I highly recommend coming to the lakes area in Minnesota. It's just the lakes are gorgeous, clean. There's great different outdoor things you can do. We have biking trails everywhere, hiking trails. We have lots of fishing, lots of water activities that you can do. I mean, there's so many cool things in the Lakes Country in Minnesota that it's definitely worth a trip.
That sounds fantastic. Well, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Thanks for having us. Nice to meet you.
Have a great day.
Yeah, you too.
Thanks for listening to the Legends Behind the Craft podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.